can. Now, today we're going to talk about getting kids to learn amidst Zoom fatigue, dealing with Zoom refusal, how to even think about going back to school, and what would appropriate accommodations be from schools right now, and how to discuss COVID safety at school. So, I'm going to start with some of the questions some of you have submitted and add in some of the questions that I received toward the end of my webinar today. So let's see. Nikki asks, I have an anxiety-filled kindergartner, taking an anxiety-filled kindergartner to school, not sure how to help him. I would imagine that lots of kids are anxious right now, and whether your kid is, so let's talk about little kids first, and then we'll talk about bigger kids. It's actually normal, healthy to be uncertain and insecure. So many things have changed so much, and there's been tremendous loss for kids, whether you're 5, whether you're 15, or those of us who are over 50. And so what we want to do is acknowledge the concerns. We want to validate the concerns, and we want to titrate how we can address these concerns and move forward. So we're maybe perhaps going to school the first day is actually too much for your child. What if you went to the playground and hang out in the playground before school started a few days before, and then went into the building, and then went into the classroom, to slowly acclimate your child to school. Your child is afraid. I'm sure your child is afraid to be away from you, but also kids have ears, and they're listening to everything that we're saying. And so any conversations that have been going on in your house about, the concerns that you have regarding having your child exposed, your kids are picking up on that. So let's try to take it slowly for young kids who are afraid to go back to school. And I would talk with the school specifically about creating a kind of adjustment plan. For older kids in middle school and high school, some of them, they're eager to go back to school to see their friends, but they're also, justifiably worried. These kids are fully aware of what's going on, and what we want to do is help them get used to being at school by talking about what are safety plans, how they can take care of themselves, making sure that they understand and you understand what the school safety plans are, and what to do if they're feeling that they perhaps have been in contact with someone or they're feeling threatened or unsafe in terms of COVID. They need some plans. They also need some language. So kids are kind of cruel to each other, and so what we want to do is help our kids know what to say when they're feeling unsafe. So whether that's something that they say in the moment, or if you create a plan that they text you with a code word that says, elephant, and that means you have to call them because they want to get out of the situation, but they don't feel comfortable, they don't want their friends to know that they're anxious. So to me, the bottom line is talking about what are the things that are making you, what are the worries that you're having, how can we meet those worries, and also what are some times in the past when you've had a worry and you overcame that worry? How could you access that courage? One little boy, I heard a piece on NPR about a mom who lives in London, and her son is a 6-year-old poet, I guess. And he talked about putting on his brave costume. And then when he comes home, he takes it off. And I thought that was just such a beautiful analogy, that for a lot of kids, going to school means putting on their brave costume and then coming home and taking it out. Another child was telling me about how his executive coach talks about a social fake. And social fake is, you kind of act like you're interested in things even if you're not. I'm not super comfortable with that kind of language. I think faking is not something we want to encourage in our kids. What we want to do is maybe think about like your social, again, your social character, your social costume, something that they are understanding they're putting on and they're taking off, rather than being something that they're not. So let's see. Here's a question. My daughter is in inclusive classes but receives help from an in-class aide. How can I be sure her IEP is followed in her blended model this fall, 2 days in person and 3 days at home? Her IEP made a world of difference. And someone else early this afternoon asked, how should I ask the school to support my daughter? Who will take the place of a one-to-one aide, and how will they be able to support her online? So these are really specific but fantastic questions. If your child has an IEP or your child has a 504, the school is mandated to provide accommodations for your child. And what I've noticed in the spring that really helped a lot of clients of mine and parents I spoke to is that when the kids were having contact with their aides online, because they weren't able to see them in person. And so what we're hoping for in the fall with hybrid learning, like the 2-3 day model, is that when the child is in school, they'll have one-to-one time, but when the child is home, that they still receive one-to-one time once a day. And this one-to-one time is really important. And perhaps it's 1-2 time. It's your child, another child, and the aide. But every day there should be a block of time where your child has access to their aide to answer questions, to do homework together through Zoom and screen share. I work with a teenager, and his supported learning teacher met with him and another student every day for 45 minutes. And they went through the homework, and it kept him on track. So I think that's a really important sort of dynamic to set up for your kids. And also for kids who perhaps had a 504 but didn't have an IEP and struggled a lot in the spring, they may benefit and they may need more accommodations. And so you'll have to go back to the team and ask for a meeting. And I encourage you to do that now, as soon as possible, based on what happened in the spring, to at least start talking to people and setting up some kind of plan through the school. As a parent, that's what I would ask for. How can my child get more personalized learning support? That's what your child needs. And for kids who already have accommodations through IEPs, what is the school planning to do to follow through on the mandates? Someone else wrote in the absence of testing, how do we advocate and help our son have a successful school year? We were relying on the testing to identify some of his needs. This is also a terrific question. So right now, some school psychologists are testing, many are not. Some private practice psychologists are testing, many are not. And so one of the challenges is that, time marches on. And so even though psychologists may not be testing, your child still needs help understanding what's going on. So one of the things that could be beneficial for kids who have ADHD are rating scales. Now, rating scales are not the same as cognitive testing or academic testing or achievement testing, but they're very helpful in understanding how executive functioning skills look in real time, how they're playing out. In fact, Dr. Russell Barkley says rating scales are some of the most important tools we have in assessing ADHD. And there are rating scales that not just look at behaviors related to ADHD, but also executive functioning skills, specific executive functioning skills. And so I think that it's really important that if you cannot have a full assessment for your child, that you have some of these rating scales filled out. And you can request that from the team at your school and the school district. The brief is a great tool for understanding executive functioning skills. The child behavior checklist, the BASC, these are all assessments for kids from teachers and parents in real time. There's also self-report measures that kids can use. I think that would be very helpful right now. Let's see. Jamie says, I'm not comfortable with my children going back to a classroom with 24, 25 kids. I don't blame you. My ADHD kid is in the middle of testing, so I need him to go, but I feel stuck between a rock and a hard place. I hear you. You are stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so without the testing, you're not going to know necessarily what kinds of specific supports to give, but if your child is getting tested, that's great, because a lot of kids aren't. If you're not comfortable with your child going back to a classroom of 24 or 25 kids, that seems reasonable to me. What are the measures for COVID safety that your school is planning to employ? Having 24, 25 kids in a classroom doesn't seem like they're following some of the recommendations of desk distancing anywhere from 3 to 6 feet. So, you as a parent have to do what makes you safe. I certainly think that asking kids to wear masks in school might help. Whether or not a middle schooler does that, I can't say. I think the likelihood of a younger child doing that is better. So I'm going to go down to some more questions. Lisa asks, my 14-year-old has regressed in her behavior, sleep and eating. She hated school before, and school... I don't understand this. School, we're doing great with rewards to meet the elephants with the zookeeper. Now this has happened. We've gone so many steps back. I don't know how I'm going to get her out of the door and in school on time at all. Okay, so Lisa, what I think you're saying is my 14-year-old has regressed. We had an incentive program set up where one of her rewards for going to school was being able to meet elephants at the zoo with the zookeeper. That is super cool, by the way. And now that this has happened, she can't see the elephants, and you don't know how you're going to incentivize her. I'd be really curious to know if she could go to the zoo. I mean, the elephants still need to be fed. And if that still would motivate her. I'm also, one thing I'm concerned about for a lot of teens is that, this kind of regressed behavior, a lot of sleeping, eating, isolation, anger, it really is masking some depression. Because kids act out, not just when they're angry, but because they are feeling depressed or anxious or isolated. And so perhaps it would be worth taking your 14-year-old to her primary care provider and letting them meet alone. Pediatricians and primary care providers are great at getting information from their patients that we as parents may not be able to get, and also to be able to give suggestions and advice that may fall more receptively on your teen's ears. So I would start with that. Again, because school is going to be in session, I think the question is, what kind of program for school would make sense for her? Would she be better with 3 days at school and 2 days at home? And if so, can you write that into her plan or create a plan for her with the school district for that to happen? Barbara says, I over-scaffolded my middle schooler in the spring and would like tips on how to step back a little. So, Barbara, that's a really great question, and I would love to know what you mean by over-scaffolding. What did you do that you felt like was too much? Because one of the challenges with having kids at home is we want to lean into their desire for independence and competence, and we also want to support them where they're struggling. And that's a really fine line to walk as a parent. And so what we want to do is give them independence in appropriate areas. And so what are the areas where your middle schooler is showing you that they can do some things on their own? I feel like there are three categories of tasks kids can achieve. So there's the tasks down here. I don't know if you can see my hand. Right here, the tasks that they've got most of the time and occasionally need a reminder. Then there's the middle area tasks, which are 50-50, maybe 60-40. 60% of the time they need a reminder, 40% of the time they can do it on their own. And sometimes they just need not just a reminder, but they need you to walk them through it. And then there's way up here, and this is the 95% of the time tasks that you need to be doing with them, supervising them, etc., and the 5% that they can occasionally do on their own. We want to land in this middle area. So we want to continue to support and encourage that bottom area where they're mostly doing stuff on their own, but we want to spend our focus on this middle area to build the skills so that the middle area can drop down and the top area can come down to the middle. I know that's sort of theoretical, but I think you know what I'm talking about. Alex asks, as an Arizonan, we were still somewhat on a COVID hotspot. Still somewhat are. Yes, I am as a result keeping my daughter home. Fair enough. Interestingly, my mother and daughter read a book together, and my mom suggested that she might have ADD, which I've suggested. She's 6, which makes me wonder if I should bring her to school anyway. Otherwise, I'm looking for some great homeschooling resources for a possible ADHD first grader with an ADHD parent teacher. Oh boy. So I'm going to let Annie give you the resources around that, because I think Attitude is, the best catalog of resources I know. I think that the issue is, will going to school assist her? In terms of some socializing. I mean, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the pediatricians who were on this panel with me the other night were very clear that kids, particularly elementary school age kids, need to be around other kids. The question is, how can you do that safely? And, I have to say, unfortunately, we don't have any real concrete, clear, consistent guidance from the federal level. And so states, school districts, everybody's doing different things. And that's not to the benefit of our children, and it's not to our benefit as parents. So I think, if you wanted to keep her home and you could homeschool her, successfully for both of you, then that's great. Otherwise, perhaps she could go to school a little bit, half a day. I don't have a clear answer on that. Udit, as an aside, I feel that in the acronym of ADHD, I think the word deficit needs to be replaced with dysfunction. Could you share your thoughts on that matter? That's a great idea. I love that idea. Attention, dysfunction, hyperactivity, difference. No one likes the word, no one wants to have a disorder. I've talked to a bazillion kids, and their attitude is always the same. I don't want to have a disorder. I don't want to have a disability. It means you have like an inability for things. So, when I talk about ADHD with kids, I usually talk about it in 2 categories: attention wandering and fast brain. And attention wandering is for inattentive type, and hyperactivity impulsive type goes under fast brain. And then the combined type, of course, is a combination. And so I think, ways that we can personalize whatever our attention difference is much better for us in terms of how we conceptualize ourselves in a more positive way. We're writing a story, our narrative, differently, and looking at it more from a wellness perspective in a way. And that will be true for our kids also. Annalise, my incoming senior in high school will be online learning through January 29, 2020. I'm so sorry. I'm really sorry. And is very upset about missing out much of her senior year. Understandable. I mean, this is, we think about the things that kids have lost. Graduations, sports, arts, music. All the extracurriculars have been laid down on, on the wayside as we've tried to just focus on academics. And for a lot of kids with ADHD, academics is like their second, this is definitely not their primary, may not be their primary interest. They go to school because they want to play soccer. They go to class because they want to be in the band. They love being in plays. And so it's really difficult to engage, seniors or high schoolers with ADHD, because it's like, well, what's the point? Particularly if you are an incoming senior, you've spent your whole career, kindergarten up till junior year, looking forward to senior year. It's the big year. And now, half of your year is at home. Like that is incredibly disappointing. Let's just own that. Let's offer some compassion to that. And let's think about how we can make this fall the best it can be given these really disappointing and unhappy circumstances. I think, you know, getting her to engage more than she did in the spring, I really feel like some of that is the responsibility of school. You know, for high schoolers, teachers should be polling during Zoom, having breakout groups, engaging kids directly. And what I've noticed is that a lot of teachers are just doing their lesson on Zoom, which is completely unengaging. And I understand why kids wouldn't want to do that. So I think that if that is what's happening at your school, I would really talk to the teachers about the fact that for kids who are alternative learners, kids with ADHD, kids with learning disabilities, kids with high functioning autism, that actually listening to someone talk for an hour, for 5 hours a day is really interminable. I think it might be interminable for me as an adult. You know, sometimes at the end of my day when I'm online for 10 hours a day, I want to just throw my computer out of the window. And so when I think about kids, you know, it's really hard. And it's not like you're playing a game, which is pings and lights and activities. You know, you're just sitting there passively listening. So I think the issue is how can her teachers engage her, and what you can do to set up a schedule that includes breaks. So I talked about this earlier today in the webinar, which is, you know, you've got to come up with some schedule. Some schedules. And for those of you whose kids are going back to school, I would encourage you to come up with 2 schedules, a back to school schedule and a if things don't work out. And they don't have to be in stone, and they don't have to be, you know, overly specific, but a general idea of what the days will look like. Because when, you know, in November we are all shut in more, you know, this virus may very well still be around. In fact, I'm pretty sure it will be. And what are we going to do then? So in the meantime, what I think is important is that kids have a chance to get outside, to socialize safely with friends, to maybe do an independent study at her school. She's a senior. Could she do something where she's volunteering somewhere? Let's try to think outside the box a little bit. Could she do a project of her own? You know, some high schools have capstones. Is there something that she's interested in enough that she would like to do a project about? Project-based learning is also often very helpful for kids with ADHD, and particularly for seniors who are dreading their year, it might help engage them. Stephanie, what are the signs of stress that we need to look for in our young kids that may not be able to tell us, that tell us that it is beyond the adjustment period and we need to look for alternatives? That's an excellent question, Stephanie. So what we'll see, you know, what would be a typical adjustment period that we would expect for kids going back to school? And I would say for most kids it's around 2 weeks. The first week is a lot of adjustment. The second week is a little less adjustment. By the third week, you're kind of more in a routine. If after a month, 3 weeks to a month, that your child is still struggling to adjust, refusing to go to school, I think that it's really important that you reach out for help. If you're seeing that kind of intense school refusal early on, then engage the social worker for your school district. Most school districts have a social worker who deals with attendance issues and are well versed in how to help kids. I think one of the things that we want to think about is young children can't tell us how they're doing, but we can observe how they're doing. So more frequent meltdowns, irrational fears, new phobias, trouble sleeping a lot, eating differently, changes in desires to connect with you, affect, more crying. So these are some of the things we want to look for. April asks, our child is newly diagnosed and at 16. How do we manage screen time knowing that they need the screens for schoolwork? This is a really important question. So when we think about creating a routine, I want you to think about blocks of time. So we have a school block of time. We have a break. It's like it's called a snack and stretch. We have another maybe class. Then we have lunch. Then perhaps there's your final classes. And then there's downtime. And that is when you get to decide as a parent, is this when I want my child to have their screen time? Do we want to do something outside the house, which I personally would recommend? Give your brain a break. Your brain needs to recover from all that screen time and then come back to doing their homework and then fun. We want to have earned screen time be a privilege. And so perhaps you decide that your child can have an hour and a half or 2 hours of fun screen time a day. Let them do a piece of work and earn an hour. If they ease off that second hour, then they have the option of earning that second hour once they complete the other have to. You want to put the have tos before the want tos. Okay, another question. Please, how do we manage the impulsivity piece, someone asked me, of ADHD when they're in front of screens with access to the internet? So this is related to the other question. And that question, and these questions are really critical. And so one of the things that we want to do is monitor access. Like, can you, and I'm not a technological wizard here, but you can actually control the kinds of access that your kids have to certain sites. I think you can do that. The other thing is that what I recommend, and if possible, is instead of having your kids work alone in their room where you can't see them, or go to class when they're alone in their room, sit at the kitchen table, or if you have in your house an office space where you're all working together. I call this family work time, and it's useful because you can kind of spin around and see what your kids are doing, and it also sets a tone. This is time when we all are working together, and then this is a time when we're riding our bikes and going for ice cream. And so we have to be able to monitor our kids. And if you cannot trust that your child is actually going to school and paying attention, then having a family work time is important. I think that it would be really necessary to have a conversation with your kids before that conversation, before that work time that you set up, having this conversation by saying to them, here's what we want to have happen. What should we do if this happens? And what should we do if that happens? That way, when kids get to have a say in what they think would be an appropriate consequence for them, it's a fascinating exercise, because usually the thing that they come up with is really pretty harsh, harsher than what you might come up with. And remember, punishments don't teach skills. Our job is to teach skills. So we want to help our kids redirect. And if they're switching to gaming, what they're showing us is that they're bored. So what else could we do when they're bored? How could they get engaged? What are some tips? Is this an appropriate time to take a short break? And plan out what the options are in a short break. Short breaks are for water, bathroom, a quick snack. Long breaks, are an hour, and that's for being outside, or, listening to music, or hanging out with a friend, or maybe even going on YouTube. Sarah says, I worry that my inability to wear a mask is giving my kids a negative view on masks. My 7-year-old has ADHD, HFA, sensory issues, etc. Sensory issues, learning disabilities, and speech issues. Others have trouble understanding him. I don't want him to send him with a mask to school so others can hear him, understand him. But I don't want him crucified for not wearing one. Any advice? Masks for his age where I live are optional. A friend of mine and a colleague was telling me that she just got and found that there are clear masks that are available. And I think if your child could wear a clear mask, that people could see what he's saying, and he would be protected as well. And you might feel safe also. I think that it's up to the schools to create a culture where it's okay to wear a mask if you want in your district and not if you don't want to. But that's the individual teachers have to set that tone, and we can't expect the kids to do that for themselves. Stephanie asks, what are the consequences of stepping away from our school to homeschooling for a year? Not virtual, but true homeschooling. And what extra considerations might there be for a child with a diagnosis that might need extra support? So I can't say exactly what I think the consequences are. Some true homeschooling can be very useful, particularly because a lot of true homeschooling means collaborating with other families and coming together for interesting activities, science lessons outside, or creative writing with a few other people. I don't know what that would look like where you live. I think the considerations really in terms of homeschooling would have to be about socialization. What kind of social outlets and practice will your child have? That's important. And also boundaries. Will your child actually collaborate with you and cooperate with you if you are the teacher? How will your child respond to other people who are their teacher? And what are going to be limits for when school occurs and when school does not occur? I think that's the most important thing, whether you're doing true homeschooling or virtual learning. What are the limits to the school day? Because kids need a break. Should schools be providing a different form of IEP plans if they are doing hybrid or virtual school? I think they should. I mean, I've talked to a number of colleagues, and if your child is now, doing hybrid or virtual school, the IEP that's in place may not be relevant, and we want our kids to have relevant, useful IEPs. So definitely go back and check that out. Jamie says bare minimum of 3 feet, and they have to wear masks. That's kind of similar to what they're doing, I think, in Massachusetts, which is where I live, which is a minimum of 3 feet, and they have to wear masks. I think that in that case, according to what I heard from the pediatricians the other night, that kids are safer than we adults would be in those situations, but it really is a personal decision, and I don't feel comfortable giving more advice about that. Nicole asks, do you have any talking points for pre-kindergarten, kindergarten students about the why behind the school closure? Well, I love the piece that Annie recommended. I think one of the things that we want to talk about is that schools are closed because they're not sure that they can protect students from getting this virus and giving this virus. And while we are very sad about that, we want to be as safe and secure as possible. And so we are going to be practicing this kind of physical distancing and facilitating your learning at the same time. That is kind of what I would say, except I probably wouldn't use the word facilitating. I would say something like making sure that you're still learning and growing while we're doing it. The elephant's incentive, Lisa, I'm following up, thank you, was given to her by a deputy head teacher. Her deputy head has a zookeeper friend. Currently, her pediatrician says she's on the list for her ASD assessment. Child and adolescent mental health team declined multiple referrals for help. We are left with no support. She will not engage with online counselors during COVID-19. Ugh, this is very, very, very sad. And I can only imagine how frustrated you are. Your daughter may not be the best fit for a traditional school, in which case, what are the options for her? I don't understand why the child mental health team declined multiple referrals. And so your pediatrician could do a slightly better job, I think, of making sure you get in to see someone, even if it's virtual. your daughter doesn't want to engage with online counselors, probably because she's sick of online. What about telephone? Um, and if not, is there someone in the pediatrician's office where she could go in and meet with someone there? Some pediatricians have like crisis counselors. Having her just talk to someone a few times, I think, would be really useful. Okay, Harlan has a question. As far as disability, the only things that ever felt like a lack for me were social conformity and slowing down my communication speeds. For me, it was more social issues than other things. That's not uncommon, Harlan. Thanks for sharing. Let's see. Toby says, my ADHD daughter is 15 and is struggling with being home all summer. I'm sure she is not alone with that. So, I want to just say many teens are struggling with this, and if there's some way between now and the beginning of school you could create or have a couple of field trips. I like to call them magical mystery tours, where you pick a place. Let's drive here and see what it looks like. I hear they have good ice cream. Or let's drive here. I hear they have really nice waterfalls. Maybe we can go for a swim. Or let's take a walk to this new place in the city. I want to try their sandwiches or their falafel. We want to try to help our kids break up the monotony, and I don't think we can rely on them to do this for themselves right now. April says, we're divorced and our 16-year-old goes back and forth between two homes with very different expectations and rules. That has been so hard for our child. That's interesting because I had a question from earlier today. In a two-household family, how do we make sure our daughter is completing assignments before going to the other parent's home? There's a lot of oversight by us that we, her parents, aren't used to. So, when kids, I think this would be good for actually a whole Facebook Live, which is parenting ADHD with divorced parents. Or in two homes, because it's a longer answer than I can give really competently right now. But the main thing I want to say is that what you have to do is both households have to work together for the priority of the well-being of the child. And this is really difficult a lot of times for divorced parents because you divorced your ex for a reason, right? You don't really actually want to deal with them, but as long as you share children, you are in each other's lives. And so kids with ADHD in particular, because of their executive functioning challenges and struggles with organization and time management and working memory, they absolutely need as much consistency as there can be between homes. This doesn't mean that you're going to do the same things all the time, but if the general structure can be the same, like for example, I'm working with a family and for a long time, it's a divorced family, one household did not want to set any rules around screens. And this was very frustrating for the other household. And it's a child about the same age as yours. And finally, the first household, after a lot of work from the school district, from the school social worker, and checked in with a therapist, and has agreed finally to co-create a screen plan. And this is like a miracle, right? And what's happened is that it started in the household where there had been no interest in doing this. And so because the program started there, that family got to see the pushback and the upset that the other family had been living with already, trying to set up the two household, trying to set up the screen limits. And so there's been some basic agreement. And the thing that I want you to think about, divorced parents out there, is kids want their parents to get along. They want to feel like both their parents care about them, and they're going to engage and attempt to to tell different stories to different parents, to try to create, to try to get away with what they can, but also to try to bring you together. Because if you're fighting about this child, at least you're engaged. Let's try to come together with some positive engagement instead. Allie says, my son is entering his junior year, probably hybrid, but he goes to private school, so they're adjusted for virtual learning. But they don't have to follow his IEP. And now that he's not taking his focalin so that he can gain weight for sports. And now he's not taking his focalin so he can gain weight for sports. Any other tricks to improve his focus? So I guess for me, my question is, why isn't he taking his focalin? Because if he's going back to school, is there a way that he could take his focalin or lower the dose somewhat so he still has some assistance for that dopamine deficit in his brain, and be able to engage in sports? I'm surprised that your school has sports. A lot of school districts across the country have canceled sports. So certainly you can use all kinds of executive functioning tricks. But if the focalin was working and it's a hybrid situation, I would encourage you to figure out a way to use that focalin. Maybe on the weekends he doesn't have to take it, so he can eat as much as he wants. Talk to your pediatrician about that. Lauren asks, any suggestions in helping my third grader with online learning and writing? I do. I'm hesitating because I'm wondering if that's something that we could do a whole chat on, because I think that it would be useful to do a chat on helping elementary school age kids with online learning. Writing is difficult for kids with ADHD. It's difficult for teens, college students, and adults, because writing uses all 11 of our executive functioning skills. And if you have to write at home on screen and you don't have a teacher around to sort of prompt you or to guide you to just do a little bit of this or a little bit of that, it's going to be harder for you. So I think the person that you need to talk to is actually the teacher. The teacher should be giving you tips on how to facilitate writing with a third grader. In terms of online learning, what I would encourage you to do is chunk it down. Make the chunks of the classes or the learning time smaller and have breaks. These breaks are really important. We can't expect our kids to pay attention online to classwork the way that they can pay attention to a movie or gaming. It's not as visually stimulating or captivating. Anne asks, our 8-year-old twins will also be going to a new school this fall that is best suited to support their dyslexia learning profiles. Congratulations. Great news, but now we need to talk about that on top of all the COVID-19 impacts and implications. Any advice? Yeah, that's a lot. So they're going to a new school at a time where they may have to wear a mask and they don't know people, and it's hard enough to meet people when you go to a new school. The good news is they have each other, so that's pretty great. The challenge is how are they going to make friends in this environment? And I think the way the kids can make friends is by wearing a mask and still interacting. I see kids all the time wearing masks and talking with their friends or playing with their friends. It's different, but it's still contact. And so I think the important thing is I would sit down with them and I'd actually role play with them. How do you do that? And they could role play with each other because they know how other 8-year-olds act. So, I would kind of gamify it a little bit, not to reduce its seriousness, but to try to practice it so that they have a chance to gain some skills. And perhaps if you know 1 or 2 people who are at this school, to set up a meeting, a safe, socially distanced meeting beforehand, or to ask the school for kids in their class, 1 or 2 kids who might be someone that they could meet outside of school. So when they go to school those first few days, it's not cold. It's not like cold, I don't know anyone. And I'm going to take one more question. So Adriana says, my ADHD ODD son will not stop replying to everything as a smart. Any ideas? We're dying here with the disrespect. Active ignoring. That's a good place to start. I mean, the thing is, why is he disrespecting you? First of all, he has impulse control. Secondly, he's angry. Thirdly, he has lost a lot of stuff that mattered to him, and he doesn't know how to challenge his frustration and disappointment appropriately. So, you could set up an incentive program, which is, for every 3 hours where he doesn't curse, every day that he doesn't curse at you, he earns an extra 15 minutes of screen time. I have another family that does the opposite. If their kids curse, they get a warning, and if they curse again, they have not earned the privilege of their phone for the rest of the day. So I would sit down with him very quickly, maybe after dinner or sometime like that, and say, it's not working. I would also, and I would say, look, what could we do that would help you shift this? Some things you might want to think about are in the moment, because your child is struggling with impulse control. So you might want to say something like fresh as for vegetables, or ignore the curse, or you get a take back of the day. Every day you can have one thing that you say that you take back and it's completely erased, And if he says something, you could look at your child and say, do you want this to be your take back for the day? And, in addition to that, having the take back, it might be, for each time that you're yelling curses at me, you're not earning points toward your extra screen time, your screen time privileges. So we want to try to set this up for him. And I do think sometimes, decide what is your bottom line. So for some parents, it's eye rolling. For some parents, it's the F-bomb. Decide what is your bottom line. For some parents, it's slamming doors. And sit down and say, here's the bottom line. When these things happen, what's the appropriate consequence going to be? So it is now 4:40.